It was Los Angeles, late 1966, inside a private training gym, tucked away behind a nondescript storefront not far from Sunset Boulevard, the kind of place most people walked past without ever noticing. No signage meant to attract attention, no crowds. Just a quiet room, wooden floors worn smooth by years of footwork, heavy bags hanging from reinforced beams, and the faint smell of sweat and leather baked permanently into the walls. This was where Bruce Lee trained when cameras were absent and reputations didn't matter, where movement was stripped down to function, not performance. That afternoon, Bruce was already warming up when James Coburn arrived. Coburn wasn't just another Hollywood actor. He was a genuine martial arts enthusiast, a serious student of karate, a man who trained regularly and prided himself on discipline rather than image. Tall, lean, sharp-eyed, with the calm confidence of someone who had spent years believing he understood combat better than most men in the industry. He had seen demonstrations. He had sparred with trained fighters. He had watched countless so-called masters perform rehearsed techniques for applause. Very little impressed him anymore. Bruce didn't acknowledge Coburn immediately. He was focused, moving through slow, controlled motions, hips loose, shoulders relaxed, breath steady, shadow boxing without flair. No dramatic snaps, no wasted motion, just small adjustments of balance, angle, timing. To an untrained eye, it looked unimpressive, almost plain. Coburn leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching quietly as Bruce continued his warm-up, occasionally glancing over with mild curiosity, but no reverence. After several minutes, Coburn finally spoke. His tone wasn't hostile, it wasn't mocking either. It was dismissive in a way that came from confidence, not arrogance. "I've seen better," he said casually, more observation than challenge, as if commenting on a rehearsal or a screen test. The words hung in the air, not loud, but deliberate. Bruce stopped moving. Not abruptly, just paused. He turned slowly, meeting Coburn's eyes without expression. For a moment, nothing happened. No argument, no explanation, no correction, just silence. Thick, uncomfortable, and unmistakably intentional. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. There are many more Bruce Lee stories and lessons still waiting to be discovered. James Coburn immediately felt the weight of the silence. It wasn't confrontational, and that was what made it unsettling. Bruce didn't defend himself. He didn't ask what Coburn meant. He didn't explain his philosophy or list credentials. He simply looked at him, calm and attentive, as if Coburn had just revealed more than he intended. In that stillness, Coburn became aware of something he hadn't noticed before: the room itself, the faint echo of Bruce's breathing, the subtle shift of weight through the floor as Bruce adjusted his stance without thinking. Nothing about it felt theatrical. It felt deliberate. Bruce finally spoke, his voice quiet, almost conversational. "Better at what?" he asked. Not sarcastic, not challenging, just precise. Coburn hesitated. That question forced clarity. Better-looking techniques, more power, more aggression. Coburn realized he didn't actually know what he meant. He had reacted to aesthetics, not outcomes, to how things appeared rather than what they accomplished. He answered anyway, vaguely. "Faster, stronger, more convincing." Bruce nodded once, as if that answer confirmed something rather than contradicted it. Without another word, Bruce gestured toward the open space in the center of the room. No bow, no formal invitation, just an implication. Coburn straightened instinctively, pushed off the wall, and stepped forward. This wasn't meant to be a fight, he told himself, just a demonstration, a test. He dropped into a familiar karate stance, solid and disciplined, muscles engaged, balance grounded. He had trained long enough to know how to move with intent. Whatever Bruce was about to show, Coburn was confident he could read it. Bruce, by contrast, didn't assume a recognizable stance at all. He stood naturally, knees soft, hands relaxed, weight floating rather than planted. To Coburn, it looked careless, almost lazy, the kind of posture that would collapse under pressure. Coburn took a breath, focused, and decided to initiate slowly. No ambush, no tricks, just a clean, controlled entry to see how Bruce responded. He stepped in. He never finished the movement. Before Coburn's weight fully transferred, before his intent could translate into action, Bruce was already there, inside the space Coburn thought he controlled. A light touch on the wrist disrupted the line. A shift of angle removed leverage. Nothing painful, nothing violent, just enough to break structure. Coburn felt it instantly. His body reacted before his mind did, correcting something it didn't understand had gone wrong. Bruce stepped back just as smoothly, resetting to neutral as if nothing had happened. The exchange had lasted less than a second. The silence returned, but this time it belonged to Coburn. Coburn stood there longer than he intended to. His stance was still correct. His balance had recovered, nothing hurt, and yet something fundamental had shifted. The problem wasn't that Bruce had countered him, it was that Coburn hadn't felt attacked. There had been no clash, no impact he could mentally rewind and analyze, just a brief moment where his body betrayed his expectations. Years of training told him he should have seen it coming. He hadn't. Worse, he wasn't even sure what had happened. Bruce watched him closely, not with superiority, but with curiosity. He could see the internal recalculation happening behind Coburn's eyes. Most men, when confronted with this kind of disruption, responded with aggression or denial. Coburn did neither. He stepped back, exhaled slowly and shook his head once, more to himself than to Bruce. "Do that again," he said quietly. "Not a challenge now, a request." Bruce nodded. This time, Coburn attacked with intent, faster, cleaner, a committed entry, no hesitation, no testing the water. He moved the way he had been trained to move when things mattered. Bruce met him just as calmly. Again, there was no collision, no dramatic exchange. Bruce intercepted early, before power, before structure, redirecting force that hadn't fully formed yet. Coburn felt his center disappear for a fraction of a second, like stepping onto a stair that wasn't there. His feet adjusted instinctively to keep him upright. Bruce released and stepped away immediately. No follow-up, no finishing motion, just space. Coburn let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He looked down at his own hands, flexed his fingers, and then looked back up at Bruce. "You're not faster," he said slowly. "You're earlier." Bruce smiled faintly. Not a grin, just recognition. "Speed comes late," Bruce replied. "Timing comes first." That was the moment Coburn understood why the room felt different when Bruce moved. It wasn't intensity, it wasn't aggression, it was absence, of wasted motion, of intention telegraphed too soon, of commitment before information. Bruce wasn't overpowering attacks, he was dissolving them before they existed. And suddenly, Coburn realized why what he had seen before hadn't impressed him. He had been watching demonstrations meant to be watched. This wasn't that. This wasn't performance. Coburn paced slowly toward the far wall, not out of frustration, but out of recalibration. His mind was racing to catch up with what his body had already accepted. He had trained long enough to know when something didn't fit into existing frameworks, and this didn't. Every system he respected relied on recognizable phases: engagement, collision, resolution. Bruce had bypassed all of them. There was no moment to resist because there was no moment to oppose. The attack had been neutralized before it became an event. That was what unsettled him. Not defeat, but irrelevance. Bruce didn't press the moment. He returned to warming up, rolling his shoulders, shifting his hips, moving with the same quiet precision as before. To an outsider, it might have looked like indifference. Coburn now understood it was discipline. Bruce wasn't trying to prove anything. He was simply training the way he always trained, regardless of who was watching. That consistency was the real statement. No adjustment for status. No performance for reputation. After a long silence, Coburn spoke again, this time without the casual tone he had entered with. "That's not karate. It's not boxing either," he said. Bruce nodded while continuing to move. "It isn't supposed to be." he replied. "Those are systems. I'm interested in function." Coburn asked how something like that was trained, how you learned to act without waiting, to respond without seeing. Bruce stopped and finally faced him fully. He explained it wasn't mystical, it was neurological, sensitivity drills, interception training, hours spent learning to recognize intent through micro-movement rather than shape. Bruce talked about stripping techniques down until only timing remained, about eliminating the need to decide once contact was imminent. "If you have to think," Bruce said calmly, "you're already late." Coburn listened closely. This wasn't philosophy layered on top of fighting. It was fighting reduced to essentials. Coburn tried again, slower, more carefully. Bruce allowed the entry to form just enough for Coburn to feel control, then removed it. Each attempt ended the same way. No pain, no humiliation, just quiet correction. After several repetitions, Coburn stopped on his own. He wasn't tired physically. He was exhausted mentally. Everything he believed about engagement had been challenged in minutes without confrontation. Finally, he exhaled and gave a short, humorless laugh. "I wasn't wrong," he said, more to himself than to Bruce. "I have seen better." Bruce looked at him, attentive. Coburn met his eyes. "I just didn't know what I was looking at." The room settled into silence again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable, it was respectful. The silence lingered long after the last exchange, stretching into something heavier than words. Around them, the gym continued its quiet rhythm, bags swaying gently from earlier strikes, the faint hum of fluorescent lights, the muted shuffle of feet from students pretending not to listen while absorbing every second. James Coburn stood still, arms resting at his sides, not defeated, not embarrassed, but visibly recalibrated. For a man who had spent decades mastering form, distance, and intention, this wasn't a loss. It was a revelation that arrived without warning. Coburn finally broke the silence, his voice lower now, stripped of bravado. He admitted that every system he had trained under relied on escalation, tension building, a readable beginning. Bruce's approach offered none of that. There was no entry point for ego, no space for intimidation, no dramatic exchange. Bruce didn't win. He ended the question before it became relevant. That was the part Coburn couldn't shake. In all his years around fighters and actors who played fighters, he had never seen anyone remove conflict so completely, so quietly. Bruce listened without interrupting, the same way he trained, present, precise, unreactive. When Coburn asked how long it took to move like that, Bruce answered honestly. Not months, not years measured by belts or trophies. It took a lifetime of refinement, of removing excess, of unlearning habits that felt powerful but slowed reaction. He spoke about rejecting rigidity, about why strength that depends on conditions fails the moment those conditions change. Bruce wasn't dismissing karate or boxing or any discipline. He was explaining why none of them, alone, were enough. Coburn nodded slowly, understanding settling in layers. He realized Bruce wasn't redefining fighting, he was redefining preparation. The discipline wasn't in learning more techniques, but in needing fewer, in training until the body recognized truth faster than the mind could interfere. Coburn admitted something quietly then, something few ever heard him say, that for the first time he felt like a beginner again. And instead of resisting that feeling, he welcomed it. The rest of the session passed without spectacle, no more challenges, no crowding, just questions, exchanged calmly. Bruce demonstrated concepts rather than techniques, how alignment removed the need for force, how timing replaced speed, how sensitivity erased the advantage of size. Coburn absorbed it not as a competitor, but as a student. By the time the session ended, the room felt different, lighter, as if something unnecessary had been discarded. Years later, Coburn would speak about Bruce Lee not as a movie star, or even as the greatest martial artist he had met, but as the man who taught him restraint without weakness and confidence without noise. He would say that Bruce didn't dominate rooms. He clarified them, that one quiet encounter reshaped how he understood conflict, movement, and control. No cameras recorded that day, no headlines captured it. But for the people who were there, the memory stayed sharp. Bruce Lee didn't need to prove he was better. He didn't need applause or acknowledgement. He simply demonstrated what happens when preparation outpaces ego. And in that gym, on an ordinary day that never made the news, James Coburn learned that silence can carry more authority than any boast, and that real mastery doesn't announce itself.